Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Continuing reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form, text number 20. So, there's not many purports, so we'll read quite a few texts. Text 20. Gadam pumso vinirbinam mitro lokesha avishat ayunam shena Sargam Prabhupada Gadam pumso vinirbinam mitro lokesha avishat ayunam shena Sargam Prabhupada Gadam pumso vinirbinam Intro Lokesha Avishat Ayunam Shina Inasa Sargam Pratipadyate Namapso Vinirvinam Intro Lokesha Avishat Ayunam Shina Inasa Sargam Pratipadyate Ayunam Shina Nasa Sargam Pratipadyate Sargam Nam so the Nirvinam, Nam so Nirvinam, Lokesha, Ayunam Shena so, Ayunam Shena so, Sargam Pratipadyate, Sargam Pratipadyate, Ram so Nirvinam, Ram so Lokesha, Buddha evacuating our homes of the gigantic form in their Bhima being separately manifested. Nitra, Sanghas, Loka Isha, the director named Mitra, Avisha, entered. Ayana Amshena, the partial evacuation process. Ina, by which the cell, living entity, the sarga, evacuation, decay, and born. The evacuated channel separately becomes manifest, and the director named Mitra entered into it with partial organs of evacuation. Thus, entities are able to pass stool and urine. 21. Stavasya nirvana intrasvadasya avasya vartayam sina purusha yamritim adhyate. The hands gigantic form separately became connected. Indra, the ruler of the heavenly planets, entered into them. And the living entity is able to transact business for his livelihood. 22. Padapasya vinirvino lokesho vishnur avishat Tashamshena purusho ya prapyam prapadyate. Thereafter, the legs of the gigantic form separately became manifest, and the demigod named Vishnu, not the personality of Godhead, entered with partial movement. This helps the living entity move to its destination. Text 23. Udhim chasya vinirbinam bhag isho dishnam avishat bodhain amshena bodhavyam pratipatir yatobhavet. When the intelligence of the gigantic form separately became manifest, Brahma, the Lord of the Vedas, entered into it with the partial power of understanding, and thus an object of understanding is experienced by the living entities. Verse 24. Hridayam chasya nibinam chandrama dishnam avishat Manasam Shena Yenaso Vikriyam Pratipadyate. After that, the heart of the gigantic form separately manifested itself, and into it entered the moon demigod with partial mental activity. Thus, the living entity can conduct these mental speculations. Next 25. Atmanam chasa nibinam abhimano vishatparam karmanam shena hinaso kartavyam pratipadyate. Thereafter, the materialistic ego of the gigantic form separately manifested itself, and into it entered Rudra, controller of false ego, with his own partial activities, by which the living entity transacts his objective actions. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The false ego of materialistic identity is controlled by the demigod Rudra, an incarnation of Lord Shiva. Rudra is the incarnation of the Supreme Lord who controls the mode of ignorance within material nature. The activities of the false ego are based on the objective of the body and mind. Most persons conducted by the false ego are controlled by Lord Shiva. When one reaches a finer version of ignorance, he falsely thinks himself as the Supreme Lord. That egoistic conviction of the conditioned soul is the last snare of the illusory energy which controls the entire material world. Maharaj, if you'd like to share some thoughts, we would love to hear.
And Vayu is in charge of the air, 10 kinds of the air. One who wants good health. One who wants strong body should worship the earth, horizon. One who wants, so in this way, one who wants a beautiful wife, worship Uma, wife Lord Shiva, she makes the arrangement. So it's personal. When you want something, once the father of Hanuman was born, and he was such an extraordinary being that he saw the sun and he thought it was a fruit. And so he ran after it to try to grab it, to enjoy it. But Indra stopped him through some weapon or something. And Vayu was very upset that this happened. So he stopped up the breathing process. All the demigods, everyone in the whole universe was stopped up. Couldn't have breathing. So they had to appease Vayu. And he let the breathing process. You can see how much power they have. He could stop up the whole breathing of the universe because everyone is dependent on him. It's like if you have one man in charge of the water department, if he says that's it, so these demigods are powerful, and Lord Vishnu makes sure that they do their duties properly. If they don't do the duties properly, they get some proper training, some chastisement. And if they really misbehave, when they're removed, Yamaraj he misbehaved according to one sage. He overly punished that sage for some offense that he had committed when he was a child. So sage said, "No, you have to be punished for that." He was removed from his position for 125 years, and as we know, came to earth in the form of Vidura. So it worked out good for him. He got a nice lesson learned. Don't punish persons when they're underage. And the world, the earth as we know it, was very pleased to have Vidura, such a pious, great soul. And he played such an important part in the Mahabharata, in the history of the world. So Vishnu makes sure that all the demigods are doing their duties correctly. Krishna doesn't have to directly get involved in these things. He has his different expansions. Balaram, and from Balaram have different Vishnus, different forms, Sankarshan, Pradyumnani, Ruda, Vasudeva, then a secondary expansion, then three Mahavishnu, Abhidakshaya Vishnu, Shirodakshaya Vishnu. All the different incarnations, forms of the Lord are there to manage this big operation, this big universe, or the big cosmic manifestation. And this is how Krishna remains aloof. He's just dancing with the gopis and his coward boyfriends, playing on his flute, having a good time. That's what you would expect. That God shouldn't have to check in on his time clock. He shouldn't have to work like that. So he's just enjoying.
Jai, thank you, Maharaj. So we're about this, and we could see that at first it was describing how all the elements became manifested, and it was all manifested from subtle to gross, from more subtle to more gross. And after the senses, naturally, after the elements, then the senses are manifest, and the working senses, knowledge gathering senses, and then this is what we're seeing, how these things came into existence in this material world, and how they're not just dry and dull, they're actually, like Maharaj pointed out, controlled by these certain personalities who are given power and jurisdiction to carry out the Lord's will. And this makes a complete system, a complete arrangement for all the living entities in the material world. And why are we here in the material world? We're trying to enjoy these measures that we're hearing about in our own various ways. But Bhagavatam describes how the living entity never, how do you say, he's never aloof. He's never free from any kind of witness. Sometimes we think, okay, nobody's watching. I can do this, I can do that. But there's always many witnesses. Witnesses from the demigods who are controlling the senses, which we wouldn't even be able to enjoy in the particular ways without their power. Witnesses from the 10 directions that are all surrounding us and encompassing us. And ultimately, witness from the Supreme Lord, who's seated within everyone's heart. So the living entity by nature is always dependent. We're dependent upon the Lord and his potencies of creation and delegation to other personalities to further carry out these different orders of power and arrangements within the material world. Prabhupada would often point out that, without the sunlight, we can't even see. We take it for granted because we have electricity, but same thing. Without electricity, without the sunlight, we can't see anything. We're dependent upon something beyond ourselves just to operate. Maharaj pointed out nicely, without Vayu's sanction of the breathing, then we can't breathe. Then there's no functioning of the body So we're completely dependent in every step of life. And this is something nice for a devotee to practice, to cultivate, to see how he's dependent upon the Lord and the Lord's energies in all spheres of life. There's many examples given in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, he says, from sacrifice brings rains, from rains bring grains. Grains are the food for all living entities that fuels them to do their activities. So in our modern age of Kali Yuga, we take things for granted. We flip on a switch, boom, there's electricity, there's light. We turn a faucet, okay, now we have running water. We go to the store, okay, there's all this plastic wrapped, packaged vegetables and fruits, and we just grab it and put it in the cart and go. But all these things would not be possible without the Lord's energies of how it's actually provided, the sun, the water, the wind, the moon, all these different spheres of life. But in Kali Yuga, where as a whole, generally we're so disconnected from this, and we just take things for granted, which further perpetuates our problem of not seeing God at all. A lot of people, there's so much arrangements nowadays for people to do their shopping online. They don't even have to go to the store. They just go and pick it up. Or you order something online and it comes straight to your door. Or you go to AI and you type in something and it does all the thinking for you. You don't have to do the thinking or research. So it's almost like we're trying to simplify life more and more and more. But to what end? So we just sit around and do nothing, and we just have robots and artificial intelligence do everything for us, and then we could just become a couch potato. So Krishna says one has to do action, like work, just to maintain his body. So working according to our nature, in harmony with the world as God intended, then there can be happiness for all. But as the more we're trying to cheat the natural laws of existence, then to this degree we'll be more and more implicated in Maya. I was reading yesterday and Srila Prabhupada was making this point. It was very nice that the more we're trying to cheat and bypass, the natural order of life, then this implicates us more and more and more into suffering, into Maya. And once you come in contact with the Vedic literature or somebody who's conversant in the conclusion of the Vedic literature, such as our Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami, he makes it very clear that there's a natural working order in life and we can work in harmony. He would often point out that real wealth is in commodities such as grains, ghee, cows, milk, trees, and smash people who thought that that factories are the source of sustenance, because we can't eat nuts and bolts, we can't eat plastic. But we produce big factories to give people jobs, and then people are happy to get a job because they have money, and then they go spend their money, and then the money is there spent on meat and alcohol and all this polluted everything. Whatever we get is not purely sattvic in this Kali Yuga. Shri Karnatai Ki Jai. Everything is contaminated. The water is contaminated. Air is contaminated. The fruits and vegetables are contaminated. Everything is contaminated. So we have to make the best use of a bad bargain and take what we can get and offer it to Krishna. In this way, Krishna will take responsibility of the karma, of the reactions, of all this ugra karma that comes along with this modern Kali Yuga. Otherwise, no matter what we do, we'll be implicated into sinful activity. Prabhupada pointed out that we're not vegetarians, we're prasadarians. We only take what we can offer to Krishna. If Krishna wanted meat, then we'd offer Krishna meat and take that. But Krishna doesn't ask for that. So the whole goal is not to be this or that, this ism, this kind of way of being, but to simply please Krishna, to put Krishna in the front and center. And Krishna, he says this in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 22, Bhoktaram yagatapasam sarva loka maheshwaram suridam sarva bhutanam yatva mam shantam richati. That Krishna is where all sacrifices should be posed. We should give all sacrifices and austerities for Krishna's pleasure. He's the well-wisher of all living entities. By us simply just engaging in sacrifice and putting Krishna in the front and center of our life, then everybody can become happy, peaceful. And without that, there will be no peace. The mind is always raging with ideas, different schemes and different plans. Even we may be engaged in devotional service and even getting somewhat absorbed. 2 minutes later, the mind comes up with a wacky idea. So we have to check the mind with higher intelligence, with spiritual intelligence. Krishna says this in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4. The number, I forget the sloka. Evam Bude Param Budvam Samstyabatmanam Atmana Jahi Satru Mahapaho. Something. You must conquer this inferior nature with higher intelligence, with spiritual intelligence. So we have to sharpen our intelligence, which is like, sharpening a sword. We need to cut through the ignorance that we've been so fond of for so long. And in the purport that we read, it was really nice because Prabhupada was mentioning this gross ignorance and a finer version of ignorance, which is a very nice point. He said, most persons conducted by the false ego are controlled by Lord Shiva. So when I was thinking this, I was thinking how most persons, what about, who's the select few that's not controlled by Lord Shiva? But then at the end, he said, when one reaches a finer version of ignorance, he falsely thinks himself as the Supreme Lord. And then he says, that's the final snare of Maya. So we could see certain personalities promoting and taking to a path of impersonalism, which impersonalism isn't inherently, how you could say, like atheistic in nature, but there's a Brahmavadi and there's a Mayavadi. Brahmavadi is somebody whose realization is at this Brahman platform. They're not necessarily averse to God, to Krishna, or trying to kill him or come up with some philosophical pose to put him down. But they just don't know their realizations just at the Brahman platform. That's where they're at. The example was the four Kumaras. They were on this platform, and when they came in contact with the Lord, smelling the lotus or the tulsi buds offered to his lotus feet, they became attracted by that transcendental aroma. But the Mayavadis, this is the worst kind of ignorance because they're aware of God, they're aware of Krishna, but they're through philosophy viewing it all as Maya and coming to the conclusion that it's all one, that There's no you and there's no me. We're all just God. There's no separateness at all. So this is the biggest ignorance, and especially for those who lead people further down this path. And unfortunately, Prabhupada's early disciples, they didn't speak Hindi. But I would have loved to hear what Prabhupada said in the Lilamrita this morning, because this other guru came to visit him, and they said it was friendly, but then Prabhupada, stuck his hand up in the air and made like a strong point. And they couldn't understand what it was, but they got the feeling of like how Prabhupada was talking to him. It's because Prabhupada is working tirelessly to promote and establish Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with so much scriptural evidence and so much research and examples from the acharyas who've also worked tirelessly for the same thing. Whereas these other personalities came and essentially said, you're all God, it'll be all good. Whatever path you take will lead you where you want to go. Just worship this demigod, worship that demigod, and it's not really who you're worshiping. That's not really the point. The point is like the devotion expressed. They'll also say you worship one of 5 different beings. I forget them, but Ganesh, Vishnu, Shiva. There's a certain name for it. But anyways, they'll say you worship these 5 deities, and then you'll get to a point where you don't need the deity anymore. So this is like worshiping the deities until we get to a platform of we're transcendental and we see God everywhere. So now we don't need the deity. So then let's smash the deities and break the deities. So this is a philosophy that's promoted by such persons. Whereas we could see in our lineage, people that are worshiping the deities, and as they develop more transcendental realization, they want to worship the deities more and more and more, with more love and more respect, more bhakti. And the same thing goes for worship of Guru. It's not that we worship Guru to become, okay, I'm realized now, I'm enlightened, I don't need somebody to tell me what to do. The Guru gives the blessings and the knowledge and the means for us to come to Krishna, and by coming in contact with him, our eyes are opened from the darkness of ignorance. And through that, we should always feel indebted to render service, that without this person's mercy, I'd be hopeless, I'd be fallen, be a space case, in the material world floating around. So it's important to know these distinctions of the philosophy, because somebody could be, as Prabhupada just mentioned, on the spiritual platform, or almost on that spiritual platform, but hit with that mode of ignorance. So it's not pure, it's not free from the influence and the modes of the material nature. And this is why Prabhupada often makes the point that the impersonalists often rise to the spiritual platform and they come down again to some altruistic activities because they don't have proper engagement. They don't have activities to do that's bringing them a higher taste. So then they need something to do, and the highest thing they could think of is some altruistic activity that will help people, their body, their mind. But what about the soul? So we're fortunate because Srila Prabhupada from day one gave us so much engagement, so much activities that we can employ our senses in the service of the Supreme Lord. And just by engaging our senses in the service of the Master, the senses will become purified from all of our misgivings and develop or unfurl this dormant love that's within our heart, ready to be given to Krishna. What is it? Sarvopadi vinir muktam tatpadadvena nirmalam hrishikena hrishikesha sevanam bhuktir uchite. Just by engaging our senses in the service of the Lord, Prabhupada would often mention that this is bhakti. This is devotional service. Somehow engaging our senses in the service of the Master, the senses for his pleasure. And he would often give the example with this, that the senses are very hard to control and they're like snakes. But when employed in the service of the Lord, they're like snakes with their fangs that have been broken. So then he make the point that nobody's afraid of a snake that has broken teeth. You may see the snake and you may freak out, but then you see that he has no teeth. You're like, oh, he can do no harm. So similarly, the question was asked last night in the class, should we look for sense gratification, separately while performing devotional service? The highest standard is, just engaging our senses in the service of the Lord to please his senses, then naturally we'll become happy. But not all of us may be coming to this platform. So we have to practice sadhana bhakti to rise to this platform, because the more that we practice and cultivate this, we'll acquire a higher taste. From acquiring the higher taste, the lower taste naturally falls away. But this is why, not everybody takes the path of renunciation, because some people need a little bit freedom, from people telling them what to do. They need a little bit more opulence in their life. They need a little bit, a man or a woman there to help them feel more complete and fulfilled. Whereas somebody who's crossed over this material world, he doesn't need anything. He's just acting for the pure benefit of the Lord and the other living entities to help them come to the Lord's service. So the Acharya is setting the example, and we can see Srila Prabhupada clearly had no selfish motives. He's doing everything just for the service of Krishna. So we may have unlimited material desires, or we may have few material desires. It's irrelevant if we take shelter of those who have no material desires and follow the path that they set, because they can help us come to that path too. So if we just take shelter of the acharyas, of Krishna, of Guru, then the path becomes possible. Otherwise, very, very tough. So it's about time. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Yes, Jagannath Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. You were talking about vegetarianism and prasadarianism. But I was just wondering, because one time when Hare Krishna Prabhu was in Russia, there was no vegetables or fruits, and there was just meat. And he wrote Prabhupada a letter and asked Prabhupada, like, okay, like, what do? We have no vegetables or anything. And Prabhupada told him to start eating meat. And I was just wondering, like, why did Prabhupada do this? Because why did he do this? And does Krishna accept it if we offer it to him, or do we have to eat it as like not prasadam and then just?
Prabhupada didn't tell him to start eating meat, but he told him that he could if he needed, if he couldn't find food. So we have to see that there's always a higher principle and a lower principle. In this case, the higher principle is serving the spiritual master and his mission of spreading Krishna consciousness to all the living entities. So Prabhupada wanted that this Krishna consciousness be spread. So in this case, he gave the blessings, do the needy, do whatever it takes. Similarly, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would, when the construction workers were building the temple, they would stop and take breaks, and they'd roll these little cigarette things. It would take so much time. He would go there and roll the things for them so they could hurry up, so they could finish the construction of the temple. So these are things we can't imitate our own self, because we're attached to such things. But when the blessing is given by a spiritual master for a higher principle, then that becomes open. But that's a very specific case, because Prabhupada knew that he sent this person to Russia, and Russia was like, it wasn't like the rest of the world. It's very poor. They didn't have food. They don't have much structure. Anti-religion. Everything was terrible. So Prabhupada gave a specific blessing for him. But, the higher principle is to spread Krishna consciousness. Okay, you have something we can do quick? Or should we do after? Okay.
The soul, we should take care of the soul, we should take care of ourselves. But what about the body and mind? And I know we shouldn't neglect the body and mind. But what is more effective, to take care of the body and mind so that we can come to a place where we can take care of the needs of our self, the soul, or should we take care of the soul with so much fervor that the mind and the body are taken care of?
I'll answer short, but we could talk about this later because it's a long thing. But basically, by performing devotional service, most of the problems with our body and mind will go away because we're living a regulated life, we're eating regulated times, we're eating sattvic prasadam, we're doing everything's regulated. So a lot of our crazy, chaotic mind and all of this will naturally become controlled and be more balanced. But if we have problems that subsist, like keep going, then yeah, we may have to do extra things such as exercise or whatever. Because if I break my leg and I can't walk for 6 months, then when I start to be able to walk, I have to go through some rehab. I have to do some exercise to get it back to a working function. But our main focus isn't on any kind of external exercise or yoga. The main focus is on the soul. So the highest principles, what's most favorable for my devotional service and what's unfavorable for my devotional service, I should reject. So in our neophyte stage, it's hard to juggle the two. So we should focus definitely more on let me become fixed in Krishna consciousness at all costs. And once we fix our mind on that, then the problems with the mind tend to go away. And the problems with the body, there's always going to be problems with the body. So we can't get rid of them all anyways. So, in short, practice devotional service and most of these problems will become smoothed out by Krishna's grace. And, whatever's not, we do the needy. But, we don't get too absorbed in that. It's there just to facilitate our service. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.